All right, we're live here. We all live here. Let me see what the followers are looking like in here right now. Anybody in the chat room yet? Okay. Okay, yes, we're live. Cool. All right. So, today's broadcast. All right, so if you're a music producer, I'm sure if you haven't been living under a rock, you heard about this new Ableton Live 9.5 update and the Ableton Push 2 controller announcement that they made at the Loop conference in Berlin, Germany this weekend. Wow. Now, that's some big news because, you know, after buying controllers and like kind of getting an understanding of how the game works, how everything works, you knew that an Ableton Push controller, Push 2, had to be on the horizon. Just given how well Push has been doing for Ableton, it was pretty obvious that they had to follow up with something that would speak to the community and do more of the things that Push users wanted to get out of Ableton Live from the controller. So, not a complete surprise for me, but man, if you've seen this controller and what it does, and how they announced it and all that, and all the videos that they've done for it, it's actually pretty impressive right now. I'll tell you why from my perspective. Being an Ableton user since about 2009 or whatever, right? So, I always had Ableton. Ableton came with like every MIDI controller that ever was developed and released since like the 2000s. So, everybody had a chance to get on Ableton real early if they wanted to, but Ableton Live was kind of like this enigma in the music production world for quite some time. It was like this thing that you got for free, and then it was like, okay, what in the world do I do with Ableton Live? Because when you open it up, it was like some weird boxes on the screen, and it's like, okay, what do I do with all these boxes? And then it had a weird looking mixer, and if you were ambitious, you might have been able to get to the point where you flipped it to the arrange view, and then it looks kind of like a linear sequencer DAW. And it's like, okay, cool. Do I need this? No, I already have a DAW. I probably bought the MIDI controller that I got with Ableton for the DAW that I'm going to use. So Ableton's not an issue for me. Like, whatever. Ableton Live Lite, I don't need it. So you get these controllers that come up later for Ableton Live. Once they kind of got hip, they can get people into Ableton by having controllers. So then they started making their controllers that they were partnering with a bit more compatible with their software. Because at first it was pretty generic, but after a while it's like, okay, you've got some direct mapping, and it's starting to become more of a system. So if you buy a MIDI controller, most general MIDI controllers now come with some type of live template that at least controls the device rack and other aspects of Ableton. So it started to kind of become more of a system. But once Ableton got into the whole domain of really making full-on controllers with like a Kai, when they started coming out with these APCs and stuff, that's when things started kind of changing for Ableton, I noticed, because people started to look at Ableton a bit differently. They started looking at it like more of a performance system, so to speak. I didn't know a lot of people that were doing the whole music production thing in it. I think Ableton always had this perception or this, it just kind of had this image of being the nerdy DAW on the market. So, with the APC 40 and all that stuff, you now have like this system where it's like, okay, I can perform using these buttons to launch clips, and I got faders and crossfaders and knobs to control the devices, and I have somewhat control over the sequencer. There's some different features, like I can do transport controls and whatnot. So it's starting to feel a lot better for Ableton. But then they got hip to how people wanted to work, and they came out with the push, the original push. And that original push, man, I feel like when that came out, people flipped. People went crazy over that thing, because the way it allowed you to now work with Ableton Live and use Ableton Live more as an instrument, amazing. They're giving you all these pads now, all these velocity sensitive pads that you can play. It's kind of like a hybrid between keyboard and pad controller, and still has the whole clip launching vibe to it. And it gives you a lot more of the whole beat making workflow aspects to it. So, the push one, or the original push, was like an amazing step in terms of giving Ableton Live a tactile, hands-on workflow for music production. Now, I used the push one, and I thought it was really cool. It was missing a lot of stuff for me, because I'm coming more from the sampling sequencing side of things for hardware. So what Ableton offered was kind of like an in-between. So it's like a MIDI controller. It's a little bit more than generic, because it does map directly to Ableton Live in quite a few substantial ways. So you have, the device control, and then you have, control over quantization, and you have control over all these things that are more music production oriented and not so much like just live performance. But it was missing a lot of stuff for me, coming from the sampling background, and the screens only showing a little bit of information, parameters maybe, but not so much anything about the real samples or audio that I'm dealing with. It didn't make it it wasn't a substantial enough step for me to go switch to using something like a push at the time. So I know a lot of guys that swear by the push right now, that just swear by it, because the ribbon controller allows them to do like real cool stuff with synths and instruments, and just the way it allows them to play and approach the music. It just gives them a whole new approach and sound, and it's comfortable for a lot of people to use the push, but it didn't speak to me. So, fast forward to this week with the announcement of Live 9.5 and the Push 2. Man, we're talking about how the MPC Touch shook up things, shook up the industry, and made it seem like this is the future. And then we got a couple weeks later the announcement of Ableton Live Push 2 and the 9.5 software. And when you see this bad boy, when you see this controller, it's like, wow. They listened. They did the things that were necessary to break it out of that whole pad controller, performance controller thing, and now it feels more like a sampler. 9.5 offers a lot of sampling improvements, not only in the software, but from the hardware. So the integration that they've offered with this Push 2 is quite impressive. All the new slicing modes, like you can slice samples from the controller on the pads, kind of like a real-time slice. And then there's these new modes, like the classic sampling mode and the sampler, and all these different tools that are accessible from this hardware make it a pretty convincing system now for a sample-based producer. And it's like, wow, you know, color screens, you got the mixer now, you got a whole new level of workflow from this thing, and it's just it's quite impressive that they were able to do that in such a short period of time, and it speaks to all the things that people like me were asking for. Now, in my setup right now, I'm using with Ableton. I'm primarily using the MPD 32 and the APC Mini to launch clips. And you know, the question is now, like, man, you know, given what the Push 2 does right now, is it a better setup? Is it a better option now for me as an Ableton Live user? And in some ways, I could say, sure, it could offer me some new levels of workflow that I don't get with the current set of controllers I have. I mean, that's pretty clear. Like the sampling and the integration that it offers now, and just the way it's laid out, it's really made for music production, especially from a sampler's point of view. You know, it still maintains the live performance aspect, and it also has, you know, the same play functionality. Like it's kind of like a hybrid keyboard pad controller deal. But man, so you know, I've been looking at it, and I'm like, the real question for me is, do I want another dedicated controller? That's a tough one because, like I said in my previous stream, like I got controllers, man. Like I got controllers. I got the, you know, MPC Renaissance. You know, I got the Machine. You know, I got some controllers, and they're dedicated. And you know, one of my concerns with this, with the Push, is that here it is, another dedicated controller that I can only use with one software that potentially, to be honest, could become obsolete in a couple years. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the risk part that's concerning for me. It's like, it's a dope controller. It looks so dope. And it's like, man, that's exactly what I was looking for Ableton Live controller. Because the other ones, you know, they didn't feel like they spoke to me in a music production context. So now when we start talking about a dedicated controller that only works for Ableton, and it only works for Ableton Live 9.5 apparently. I'm not sure, we have to confirm that, but I don't think it's backwards compatible, just as a lot of the other controllers weren't backwards compatible, because you couldn't use the Push 1 with Ableton 8. So I'm wondering now, you know, do I need another dedicated controller? I'm not convinced of that part. I'm sure it adds value, but you know, one of the issues again is that if I have a dedicated controller that doesn't work with anything else, and in 2 years they add, say, MIDI output and CV out, and that, you know, speaks more to me because like I have hardware, I have, like, you know, MIDI hardware here. And when I compare it to like a controller like the MPC Renaissance or the Machine Studio, I would lose out on some functionality in the MIDI domain to have a Push 2 right now. I still would have to use one of my other controllers or MIDI interfaces to still hook up my MIDI devices. Now keep in mind, yeah, some of my MIDI devices are USB, so I can connect directly. But the point is, if another controller comes out that has a couple other features that are an improvement and give me a bit more workflow, do I feel like I need to upgrade every time a new controller comes out? You know, that's the challenge with integrated systems I'm finding. And it's not limited to Push. It's like, it's, you know, every integrated system has that debacle. It's like you can't put all the features into the first version because, I mean, just developmentally it's not possible. And also, you know, I'm sure they don't know everything that we want to do with these controllers from off the bat. You know, some of it, especially when it's a new device, is up for interpretation. You see how the users are going to use it, and then you can start to accommodate things and add features to it. So that's one of the challenges I'm seeing with these integrated controllers, is that as the user base grows and really defines what kind of role the controller is going to have, there's always going to be some new things that are on the horizon for improving the controller. And so it's a challenge. But for me, like I said in my previous stream a couple days ago, I'm still kind of leaning towards the whole touchscreen systems. So, the thing is this: the touchscreen systems, like a Surface Pro or Surface Book or something like that, when you're using it with a software that is integrated or developed for touch and supports multi-touch and gestures, it feels like the whole need for the integrated controllers becomes a lot less important. It's not as needed, because all the functionality as far as the feedback and the control happens on the screen. So, now you're dealing with a computer system that has a touch interface that handles most of the relevant music production controls and parameters. So, that, again, the issue with that domain is that there's only a few software developers right now that have embraced it. So you kind of have you have Bigwig right now with the 1.3 update that's coming, and then you have, say, I guess if you want to say Open Labs with their solution as well, Stage Light. Stage Light is integrated for touch, and Stage Light is pretty limited, but you can do some touch stuff in it. And then you have Fruity Loops or FL Studio 12 that's integrated, and it's developed for touch. But you don't have a lot of options. But again, if you're using something like Ableton, if you're a person that is just into one system, then the Push 2 seems like a great option, because you're not really concerned with so much this controller doesn't work with anything else. But for me, what I was finding was that I was jumping between different DAWs depending on what I had to do. So sometimes I would need to do things in Pro Tools because I work on sessions that required Pro Tools, or sometimes I needed to work in Logic. And the problem with the integrated controllers I've been having is that you can only use certain integrated controllers with their software, whatever their dedicated software is. Machine seems to be a bit better because it has a lot of templates and you can use it to control different DAWs. But, there's something to be said about some of the more baseline controllers like the MPD32, where it does a very specific set of things, but it pretty much functions the exact same way regardless of what DAW I put it in, because that helped me to be able to jump around. If I needed to work on a different session, somebody sent me something in Logic, I can jump in there and I don't have to reconfigure. But with the Live controller, the Renaissance, and other controllers, it just feels like I don't have that type of flexibility. So I overall, I'm just like, I'm really excited to see how this Ableton Live 9.5 and the Push 2, I'm interested to see how it really it communicates to the music community. Because honestly, for me, the Push 2 was a great announcement, but the real announcement for me was that Link. If you didn't check Link out, that's the real jewel for me personally. Being a guy that's into iOS and just being a person that's into collaboration in general, I'm very adamant about collaborating with different producers and artists and whatnot. I love getting in the studio with different producers and, jamming out and coming up and just being creative. And also, I love incorporating my iOS devices into the studio because there's some different levels of control. I'm really into the touchscreen stuff. So the level of control and just the options that are available in iOS, gives me a lot of functionality in the studio. So what this link does now is allow people to come into a environment that has Wi-Fi and be able to communicate with a session in real time. So now we can collaborate together, and it allows you, either whether you're on an iOS or another laptop or whatever, you can communicate to Ableton Live in a real time session. So that's amazing to me. That's a major development. Now, granted, on the iOS side, not all software, not all the applications are working right now. So I'm sure that they're going to get more developers involved with Link, and it's going to become more of an ecosystem, and you'll have a whole community of people that are wanting to work with Link. But right now, there's a few main app developers that are developing for Link as well. So you have like IMPC Pro and a few other ones. But that alone, just the fact that they were thinking about collaboration in such an elegant way is really impressive to me. Like the fact that Ableton thought about the musician and the needs of the musician with regards to collaboration really brings, to me, that's a new paradigm for music production, because I felt like a lot of this computer stuff was taking us away from really working together and making music together, because there was a lot of technological things that kept us from really coming together. Like you had to have a really complex setup if you wanted to link different systems, separate computer systems together and have a session. So they really thought about what is the best way for us to allow musicians to collaborate when they are computer based. Because it's very simple when when you're dealing with hardware. Like I can bring my keyboard, my dude can bring his guitar, my other dude can bring his bass, my other dude can bring his drum machine, and we all get down, and it's pretty simple. Like, all hook up into a mixer, or you all hook up into some audio interface, and you record it and you jam out. And me and my buddies used to do that all the time back when I was in the dorms in college. I used to, me and my dudes would come through. They would all come into my dorm. We'd all link up into my audio interface or my mixer, and we just jam. Everybody had their own, their own keyboard or guitar or whatever. But in this computer age, it's been like, how do you do it? Do you have a whole bunch of MIDI controllers hooked up to one computer and everything's on a individual input? And it's a lot of technological things that prevented that from being an option. I mean, yeah, you can hook a couple guitars up to an audio interface, but what about the guy that's on a drum machine, and then the other guy that's on his iOS device, and the other guy that's on his laptop as well that has something else he wants to do? It's like, okay, now you have a solution. So my thing is, I really hope that other software developers look at that and say, this is really the future of music, because music is always better when you have multiple minds collaborating and really, throwing their feelings and emotions and sensibilities into the pot and just developing together, because there's a whole vibe that comes from that, and you get a new level of creativity when multiple minds are in the same space at the same time working. This is very, very different from sending a track to somebody via email and then just, hey, do what you do over it, and if I like it, I'll continue working. Like when you're in the studio with other people, that vibe and that energy, if that energy is right, you go places you never would have went by yourself. So for me, that's a great step for musicians. Ableton, like, kudos to Ableton for that, because that's going to change things for a lot of people like myself. So, I mean, I wanted to just, comment on this. There's a lot that can be said about the software, the 9.5. I don't have a push 2 right now. I'm not sure if I'm gonna get one yet. Still, plenty of my buddies have one at this point, so I've been talking to folks, and everybody loves it. So I'm not ruling it out completely, but I'm not sold that it's an option for me at the moment. So anyhow, I just wanted to chop it up about that for a minute. Let's continue to talk about this. I'm gonna put the replay of this on my YouTube. So if any of you guys missed it, you'll be able to see it on YouTube or whatever. I'll have it on my website. So yeah, go ahead and check my website, www.altruwest.com. That's where you can get all the tech talk, all the gear gossip, as I would call it, all the stuff we're talking about with regards to music production and sound design. We're getting it in at altruwest.com, and you can also check out our store. We got the Altruwest shirts available if you want to pick one of those up and support. But yeah, man, we're just gonna keep getting it in. I might come back and do another Ustream soon if I get more hands on with the push. I might have a revisit to my opinion, and I might be sold at that point. But at the moment, I'm just really responding to the announcement. The announcement was ridiculous. I think it was game changing in some ways, and it's really exciting to see where we are with the integrated controller technology now. So yeah, man, I'll holler at y'all later. All right, thanks for joining me, everybody that tuned in. I appreciate y'all. Until next time, peace and God bless.